Right, g'day everyone. Welcome to the Elements of Narrative, and today we're talking about setting. So, just to recap, here are the elements of narrative that we're studying, and today we're focusing on setting. So, what is setting? In its most simplest form, setting is essentially the when and the where. That might be whether future, present, or near present, or the past. But it also includes the level of reality that's going on in the story. So it could be fantastical, which means what extent does magic and mysticism play a role in the story? So if it's a fantasy story with magic and dragons and things, then the fantasy elements are going to play a very strong role in the story. There's other stories that have magical realism in there, where the story is set in a modern, almost real setting, but there's some mysticism going on there. And so there can be a range of those elements at play. It could be reality, a real story set in a real world, whether that's, for example, a World War One story or World War Two story, or it could be alternate reality as well. So why does setting matter? Well, for the writer, selecting the setting that suits the purpose and the conflicts in the story is really important, and it depends a lot on what the purpose is for the author. Now, the reader, it's important for them to have a grasp of the setting so that they can know what to expect. And it's often closely tied with genre, and it depends a little bit on the genre. Certainly if it's sci-fi or fantasy or urban fantasy, dystopian novels, the setting is going to be a really important part of the story. Setting also helps communicate the theme and the message. So especially in literary fiction, the setting will often be one of the driving factors to help the author pull out key themes or the messages that they're getting at. So what's the connection between setting and the other elements? So for plot, it's important to think, well, what events make sense for that setting? For example, if we've established that the setting is high in realism, having an event where a wizard appears and saves the day isn't going to make sense for that setting. It would make sense for a fantasy setting, though, and fantasy genre, which we'll get to in a moment. Structure. The events need to be organized to best achieve the author's purpose. So the structure has to consider when the setting is fully developed. Is the author going to hold key parts of the setting back and slowly let them out? Is there a secret part to the setting that we need to know about? That could be anything from a mysterious place within the setting. Game of Thrones does that really well. There's places that are mentioned, but we don't, and our curiosity is piqued, but we don't get to see those places or learn about those places until later on in the story. And so there's structural elements to help drive intrigue. Stylistic devices. The setting will often determine the mood and therefore the diction or the word choice of a text. And we see this really clearly in short stories and sometimes narrative poems as well. Point of view. Now, what your narrator reveals about the setting influences the reader's perception of it. And so this might be tied to literary fiction where there's some social criticism going on. Now, that could take place through first person or third person narration, but in either case, the narrator is selecting details to tell or show the reader. Moving on to genre. Very closely connected for particular genres such as dystopian, future, or sci-fi. fantasy as well. This can be really important depending, again, on the genre and the reader's expectations for that genre. Theme. Now, setting often mirrors themes in the work, especially in literary fiction. So having an understanding of the setting and how that connects to the themes and also the message that the author is trying to express is really valuable. And be on the lookout for elements of the setting that can act as symbols for theme as well. Now, conflict. How do the rules of the world cause conflict? Now, we saw this really closely when looking at plays such as Romeo and Juliet, where the rules of the world really impact the story, because Romeo is supposed to defend his honor, Tybalt is supposed to defend his honor, and that results in Mercutio getting involved in the fight and Mercutio getting killed. So these rules of the world really do influence the types of conflict that we see. And that can be across person versus person conflict. It can also be person versus society conflict. It could be a survival story, in which case it's person versus nature. And character. How the characters respond to their world is really important. And ideally, there should be a close connection between what the character chooses to do, their characterization, or their personality, the plot events, and the setting that they are in. All right, that's it for setting. And if you have any questions, please let me know. All right, that's it, everyone. Thanks.